freedom of choice, education fraud, and the growing longevity crisis in America. All that on today's episode of Unlock Your Wealth Today, your life fully invested. Welcome to Unlock Your Wealth Today, your life fully invested. I'm your purveyor of prosperity and host, Heather Wagenhals, and I'm making success simple for people just like you on today's extended interview episode with Dr. Ed Hudgins of the Heartland Institute. I've been privileged to know this man for several years, and he is brilliant when it comes to looking at things objectively, how to create public policy that works for everyone, and we're going to have an incredible discussion on education in America today. We're going to also talk about healthcare and freedom of choice and what that really means when it comes to cutting healthcare costs, making it both more affordable for you, and how do we address this growing longevity crisis? Whoever thought getting old would be a problem? Especially nowadays, it is. And we're going to talk about a study in Japan that was launched and Ed Hudgins' response to it on today's episode. This will be brought to you commercial free because, well, guess what? Our show sponsor, Audible.com, is going to offer you a free audiobook download for viewers of Unlock Your Wealth Today. All you have to do is visit the website at audibletrial.com/unlock your wealth, and you can claim one of up to 150,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. So let's take a look at today's interview, shall we? Well, welcome back to the show, actually to the next version of Unlock Your Wealth. You've been a frequent guest on Unlock Your Wealth Radio, and now I'm excited to have you on Unlock Your Wealth Today. So welcome back to the broadcast.
Thank you, and I'm interested in unlocking a whole lot of cool ideas right now.
I know. So one of the things that's really interesting with the work that you're doing at Heartland is you work on legislation. You work on making our lives better, easier, simpler, I guess is the best way to sum it up. And there was an interesting study done because, the big focus over the last several years, as you know, has been health insurance and Obamacare and am I covered and expenses now. But one of the things that we fail to recognize is the little known area that only probably life insurance companies think about, and that's called compression of morbidity. So mortality rates are going down. We're living longer than ever, and that presents unique challenges for the world. So tell us a little bit about this Japanese study that kind of spurred the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, well, thanks. This is really, really exciting. It's the thing you allude to is that Japan has the oldest population in the world on average, and it has the longest living people on Earth on average. And so the Japanese now have what you might call an aging crisis on their hands. Specifically, they have a whole lot of old people, and they've got to look at how they're going to take care of them health-wise. And so, but this reflects a couple of even deeper things that we should be talking about. First of all, what has happened in the last decade or two is something that was science fiction. It's now science fact, and that is with biohacking, genetic engineering, and a lot of these advanced technologies, literally, and this is in the Japanese report, individuals now can be living to 100, 120, 150 years old, maybe older, and still be healthy and still possibly be active in life. So the whole notion of let's everyone retire at 66, right, it just isn't going to work very much anymore. So here's and let me give you a little bit of the background here to show you this is not just science fiction. The Japanese report that you allude to mentions some new research that's being done on aging. Now, research has been done on aging by serious scientists for some decades now. A lot of it's coming to fruition. There's a guy named Aubrey de Grey. He wrote a book, I think it was almost 20 years ago, called Ending Aging. He's a Brit. There have been a lot of others who've done real serious research. We're reaching a point now where we're understanding aging and, by the way, a lot of the other diseases that cause our bodies to fall apart. Let me give you a little interesting example here. Every chromosome you have in your body, every single cell has a chromosome. And on these chromosomes, this is a picture of a chromosome or diagram, you have these little things called telomeres. This is like on the end of a shoelace, there's a little piece of plastic, right, that holds the shoelace together. What happens over time is every time the cell reproduces, the telomere gets a little shorter, the telomeres get a little shorter, and eventually the telomeres aren't there anymore. And when they're not there anymore, the cell doesn't reproduce. And what happens is that's what causes us to age and to shrivel up, and our organs don't work properly, and we die. And no human has ever lived past about 122. And every single living organism, except for one little sort of almost microorganism, has this same thing coded into our genes. Well, we actually now understand the process of aging, or what causes aging, and we're now investigating how to stop it. And for example, this is literally the end of, looks like this is the end of April. A report came out. What we know is that there's an enzyme called telomerase that basically stops and can reverse those little telomere things from disintegrating or from disappearing. And so, in other words, we wouldn't age. This is a quote from an April 25th news report. Enzyme that affects aging, cancer, decoded. Elated scientists announced Wednesday the completion of a 20-year quest to map the complex enzyme thought to forestall aging by repairing the tips of the chromosomes in plants and animals, including humans. In other words, we now have decoded the enzyme that if we can develop the technology, we can stop your body from aging, and on a sort of a smaller scale, while that technology is being developed, maybe stop cancers, stop your brain from disintegrating, stop Alzheimer's disease. This is incredible. This isn't science fiction anymore.
Pretty exciting.
It's incredibly exciting. Literally, we're talking about technology that can allow you to live to 120, 150, and not age, not have your body fall apart.
Yes, because I've got arthritis already, so I know that part.
Yeah, well, I haven't gone out and jogged today, and then afterwards I have to, anyway. But here's the interesting thing. What the Japanese had to do, because they have this aging population, they need to expedite these regenerative medicines, not just this is really cutting edge stuff, but other stem cell-based research that can stop diseases, that can stop maybe Alzheimer's and so forth. They adopted a policy called Free to Choose Medicine based on an earlier version of this book that I'm holding in my hand by Bart Madden. And what this is this. In the United States, it costs about $2.6 billion, billion with a B, and it takes over 10 years at least to bring a new drug, a new pharmaceutical from the lab to your local pharmacy. $2.6 billion. It's a lot.
It's an insane amount of money.
Now, part of it is because there's a lot of work involved. When you're dealing with your body, we've got to make sure you're putting the right stuff in it, right? So you're not going to die. But here's the thing. A lot of that cost is with you have to go through the Food and Drug Administration. They have to approve it. And so a lot of that delay in cost is because you have first these so-called preclinical tests, then you have safety tests to make sure that the product won't kill you. Then you have all of these so-called efficacy tests to check the dosages, to check if it mixes well with this and that and the other. This can take years, and here's the problem. When these kind of medications are delayed for years, people die waiting for them. If you have AIDS and there's a very promising medicine out there and they say, well, maybe in 3-4 years this might be available. Well, guess what? You don't have 3 or 4 years. Maybe you don't have 3 or 4 months. So the Japanese decided to try this new approach. Free to Choose Medicine basically says patients can access, after a medication is determined to be safe, if it looks really promising, The government can't prevent you from getting that medicine. Or more specifically, you can go to the producer of the medicine and say, I would like to have access to that medicine to use, and they're not going to get fined by the government for letting out a medicine that hasn't been approved by the government. And one of the things we're doing at the Heartland Institute right now with this book that we just published, the third edition of it, Free to Choose Medicine, is pushing this approach here in the United States to get our Food and Drug Administration to liberalize its approach, to speed things up, and to give patients the power to choose if, in fact, there's a medicine out there that looks good, but it's not government approved quite yet. Well, it's your body, it's your health, right? You should be the one to make that choice. So that's one of the things.
So when we talk about, changing the legislation, what does that entail? Because, you've got to raise consumer awareness, because those are your voters, right? So, and then you have to also educate all of the politicians that have been elected to vote your way. What is your hurdle? Like, where along the process, either educating the public or educating the politician, where is the disconnect right now to keeping this from getting pushed through real quick?
Well, first of all, education, you're right, is the issue. Now, there are a lot of patient groups who understand the problem. There are a lot of groups of survivors of people who have died because they didn't have access to such medications. There's a group called the Abigail Foundation that there's a gentleman in 2000, I think it was, his 16-year-old, or it was 20-year-old daughter, I think it was, had a neck cancer. Couple of months of treatment didn't work. In March of, I think it was 2001, the doctor said, look, there's no way to treat you, but there's a very promising medicine out there, but it's still in these government mandated tests. Mm-hmm. They tried to get the medicine from the manufacturer. Manufacturer said, no, we can't. It's not approved by the government. They went on local TV here in Washington, D.C., WMAL, tried to plead to, please, can the government release this? It tried to pull strings. And this little girl died in June of 2001. And I think the medicine was later approved, and it looked like a pretty good medicine. So you do have patient groups right now that are active in this area. However, I think a lot of it is a matter of educating policymakers, educating patient groups, educating the public that literally your life is on the line. Your health is literally on the line. Anyone who has ever had a relative with cancer or who's had cancer themselves, or any of these other, especially Alzheimer's, a horrible, terrible ailment. Yeah. Part of it right now is just educating. It's understanding what the problem is bureaucratically. It's calling attention to it. And by the way, the new head of the Food and Drug Administration, Scott Gottlieb, is actually a very good guy. He worked on the problems with the FDA when he was at the American Enterprise Institute. Now he's the head of the FDA. So we got a guy on the inside who's very interested. And President Trump has said we want to do more to bring down the costs of medication and this sort of thing. And so his administration is very open to any kind of reforms like this. So it's a process.
So as it stands now, who gets punished if a company were to give medication out before somebody's eligible for it?
The FDA could come down on their case. Now, there are supposedly these exceptions. This is very, very difficult to get. And a lot of times, the company doesn't run a risk, the liable, or if the medicine doesn't work or whatever, they could be liable. Insurance companies might not pay for it. Probably they wouldn't pay for it. The insurance company say, sorry, not approved by the government. We're not paying for it. So there's a whole bunch of moving parts here. But the point is that with these new technologies, with all of this new promise, with a lot of entrepreneurs coming in with these new approaches, I think that we can also reach out to them and say, like, a lot of Silicon Valley groups are putting money into this sort of thing because they're very interested in curing diseases. It's a good cause. And I think at some point they're going to start bumping up against this stuff. They're going to say, hey, wait a minute. We're the guys who basically sat in our garage and created the communications and information revolution.
Right.
So, and the reason is because nobody got in our way. We didn't even think about who to ask for permission. We just did it. Now they're going to kind of find they're putting a lot of money into something, and then at a certain point they're going to start hitting up against, well, you got to do this government thing, that government thing. I'm not saying we shouldn't test for safety, obviously, but I'm saying that I think these guys are going to be our potential allies. Mark, Zuck, the head of Facebook, he said he was going to put $3 billion into looking for a cure for cancer. And what, interestingly enough, by the way, and this will get into the next discussion here, is that there was a British columnist who immediately said, this is a terrible idea because there are too many people on the earth and we need to have more people dying because of overpopulation.
Oh, Lord.
I'm serious. Bill Gates is putting a lot of money into these kinds of research, are going to say, wait a minute, these are not our values. And I think there's a chance that they're going to come around on some of this and basically see the government as a problem and look at this deeper issue. But there's a couple of other important things. Since we're talking about wealth here and wealth planning, I think we need to look at a couple other issues. Think about this. You're going to live to 120, 150, right? How are you going to pay for that? Okay?
Exactly.
And you're thinking, well, you got a 401k, you got an IRA, whatever. Okay. But if you're talking about living an extra 60 years, then suddenly you've got to start thinking differently about your life, right? And about your retirement.
Well, right.
And I think you're going to have a couple of things. First of all, you're probably in the long run not going to be retiring at 66 because not only can't afford it, you won't want to. Because if you're 66 and you're healthy, you're healthy and you're strong and you're active and you don't have these problems, 66 comes, you have a nice birthday party, you have a cake, whatever, and then you're going to want to continue to do exciting stuff because you're still young physically and hopefully mentally. You're still young because of these advances, and we see the advances in healthcare over just regular healthcare over the last couple of decades, right?
Right.
So that's the first thing: is people are going to be working longer, not as drudgery, but as well. I don't want to. I'm a productive member of society. I get my sense of self-value and self-worth
Your desire
because
to
of
achieve
this.
is still there.
Exactly. So that's going to be the first thing to think about when you talk about wealth is you're going to work longer probably because you want to, and you do need to, okay? Second point about your wealth is there's a lot of talk, unfortunately it's on the left and the right in this country, about robots are going to take all our jobs. Artificial intelligence is going to wipe out a whole lot of employment, of high-paid employment, and this sort of thing. Well, they had the same argument 150, 200 years ago when machines were coming into textile factories. Instead of having 10 workers spending all day to produce 50 sweaters, you now have 5 workers working all day with machines to produce 1,000 sweaters. And a lot of people say, oh my God, where are all these poor out of work people gonna go? Well, what happens is there's always room for labor to do something. You just have to go to a higher value thing. So if you're not working in a textile factory, maybe you'll be making steel, maybe you'll be making automobiles, maybe you'll be making these things or the machines that we're talking on right now. Maybe you'll be designing them. Maybe you'll be figuring out how to develop the infrastructure to colonize the planet Mars and change its atmosphere so we can breathe there and make it a second home. There's all sorts of things we can do.
Right.
But here's the thing. If you want to, what you're going to have to think about and what people have to think about is technology is not something that takes our jobs. Technology is something that creates more opportunities for us to trade our labor for more stuff, okay? So got to think about it that way. And that's a danger, is that people are going to say, we need to save our jobs and therefore stop robots from taking our jobs. I'll give this example. My dad is 86 years old, wonderful man. He worked all of his life as a truck driver. He delivered bread, okay? Now, how could my dad do that and support 6 kids in a nice middle class sort of a thing? Was it because he worked harder than, say, a medieval peasant? Well, he certainly worked hard, but a medieval peasant probably worked a hell of a lot hard just for enough bread maybe to feed himself and a few kids, the ones that didn't die from, who knows what kind of terrible thing. Yeah, my dad was able to trade his labor and his hard work and his diligence for more stuff to raise us because the society was so much more productive. That's how you have to think about wealth in the future, is the more stuff that's produced, the cheaper robots can do something and technology can do something, the more you're going to be able to trade your labor for that stuff. Again, remember in the 90s, for those of you, and there was the fear of the digital divide, meaning there's going to be an elite that has access to the internet and all the knowledge of the world, right? And then there's going to be the masses of poor, ignorant peasants out there who are going to be oppressed by these terrible people. Everybody has one of these now. Everyone.
Yeah, if you think about it, I sold cell phones when they first came out, and you had your choice of a car phone, or a brick phone. They called it the brick phone. And then they had the more mobile one, which was the bag phone. And you know what? Mm-hmm. Back then, so I was 18, 30 years ago, mm-hmm. which freaks me out that I'm old enough to have adult members. There you go.
20 years ago.
I love you, Ed. So 20 or 30 years ago, they cell phones were like $800. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So fast forward to today, cell phones are still $800, but our mindset is that it used to be something luxurious for the elite, but now, guess what? Mm-hmm. It's actually cheaper than what it was back then because the dollar isn't worth as much. So
Precisely.
Technology got cheaper. Our adoption of it as not necessarily a luxury, but a necessity. I need it. I can't be safe. What happens if I get a flat tire? Because we all forgot how we changed flat tires when we had a horse and cart.
Yeah.
But we have to have the cell phone now. So we've justified that as something that's a minimum baseline. But what that means, as I'm interpreting it, is our standard of living has raised. Because who would have ever thought back when we were dialing like this, that now we'd be talking with this little itty bitty device and everybody has them, that they're so universal. So our quality of life has increased as a result of it. And my thought is the people who, are complaining about loss of jobs. I mean, I think about the energy issues and how we're doing some really crazy things at the presidential level to stimulate jobs in an industry that is becoming obsolete because there's better options out there. And we're trying to shore up an industry instead of, it reminds me of that book, Who Moved My Cheese? Mm-hmm. If the cheese isn't coming here, go figure out how to find more cheese elsewhere.
Yeah, and by the way, we have plenty of energy. That's not a problem, really. It's going to be the market. By the way, that's a problem, is that when you force technology with the government, you have problems. For example, two of the most inefficient forms of technology to generate energy are solar and wind. And Germany, for example, is going to get rid of its subsidies for windmills in the next year or so because they simply can't afford it. And so the Germans are going to be taking down most of their windmills and shipping them to Bulgaria for fire sale prices because it's cheaper to burn clean coal in a factory. And because they're getting rid of all their fossil fuels, you know where they're going to get their energy from, and their nuclear fuel? They're going to buy it all from Russia. It's kind of insane. But here's the thing. This gets to the third point, is we want this age of technology so we can trade our labor and our stuff for more stuff. Here's the other thing. Education is what's key, okay? In other words, we have to work smarter. And this is a big problem. We've talked about how exponential technology is creating new medicines, new cures, more of these phones, all of this kind of stuff. We need a disruptive revolution in education. Let's take a look at the United States. Right now, we're number 26 or 27 in science in terms of industrialized countries. We're something like number 33 or whatever in terms of math. If you take a look at real inflation-adjusted spending for K through 12 education over the last 25 years, it's gone up by 66, 100%. Depends on how you do the calculations. SAT scores flatlined. You take a look at the fact that 5 to 6 million jobs in this country go begging because businesses can't find people with the skills. You find in higher education a horrible system. Technology schools are pretty darn good. We are world class in those areas, okay? But a lot of kids go into college because they can get a government-backed loan, which simply drives them into debt. They get a degree in something that nobody wants and nobody cares about, and it's not even good for scholarship, frankly, because there are already 482 new articles on Shakespeare this year. I'm a big Shakespeare fan, but there's no need for it. And so you have all this wasted human power, right? And these folks end up graduating. They can't get a job anywhere. They've got mountains of debt. And the guy who is the welder, the guy who's the tech guy doing something else, he's getting $100,000. Mm-hmm. So we need a revolution in education from K-12 all the way to the higher education system. Couple of facts. People like Charles Murray, great libertarian theorist, has written a book about how you don't need college. He's gone down and looked at the specifics. Peter Thiel, one of our great entrepreneurs, co-founder of PayPal, has written about this as well. He actually had a foundation to pay people not to go to college, to say you're wasting your money. You can get a better job, train yourself for something that's going to be valuable in this new market that we're just talking about. Right. Where you can trade your labor because somebody's going to want it, as opposed to going to college for something other than maybe engineering and things where, there really is a market for it. The other interesting thing is this. There should be more, we should have more consumer choice along the way. One of the interesting things about Switzerland is they have a program, it's kind of a learn and earn program where, let's say you're in high school, right? Maybe during the summer or whatever, maybe you go working for a pharmaceutical company. First of all, you actually learn real work skills. You have to come in on time. You got to put in the hours. You got to be able to work with your colleagues and team members and that kind of thing. Something a lot of kids don't get in this country, as opposed to just spoiled. I want it. I need that, right? This kind of thing. So you learn work skills. You also earn some money. So you get into the habit of, the way I prosper is I have to produce value and trade it with somebody instead of just whining and asking the government to hand it to you. And third, you kind of get an idea of what you want to do for a living. So maybe you go into a pharmaceutical company and say, well, I don't know if I want to do a research lab sort of thing. I didn't like that so much. Maybe you go into a manufacturing firm for a summer. That's really cool. There's certain jobs there I really like, and maybe I should train for that. So you're educating yourself about your own future career, what you might like to do. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to do that in this country, because the government essentially will pay you with a loan guarantee to go to a college to get a degree that nobody wants, and that you're basically going to be, to put it bluntly, you're basically going to get a mountain of debt so you can spend 4 years basically getting drunk and getting laid. Okay, there are cheaper ways to do that.
Yes, and more debt-free ways.
And that's a whole other show. Let's keep this at a family level. But the point is that that's something that's very difficult to do in this country because of the way the government loan guarantees work, because of the tax system, because of what an industry could do, what they could or could not take off of their taxes if they start hiring kids, like this. So there's a real need to, and the final thing is this, a lot of the pathologies in this country, the anti-achievement philosophy and dogmas and socialism come out of the universities.
They're inculcated.
They're inculcated. They're indoctrinated at the university level. K through 12 has a lot of its own problems, and that's why we need parental choice at K through 12, and that's one of our big things at the Heartland Institute. And what happens at the higher education level is they get those dogmas cemented in, and then they end up becoming the teachers, the journalists, the media folks, the folks who are running pension plans, all this kind of thing. So you have those dogmas, anti-achievement, leftist dogmas out there. And that's a big problem. So we need to have major disruption of the education system so that, coming all the way around to our first discussion about wealth, so that your listeners can figure out how with them or their children they can train themselves for careers that will bring them wealth, so they'll get the moral habits of people who are achievers and wealth producers. And that's one of the reasons why we need this disruption in the education system, so they can trade their labor for all of that stuff that the robots are going to create, and all of those medical breakthroughs that scientists are working on even as we speak.
But and I liked what you said, when we were talking offline earlier, we were talking about this mentality of the worker being owed somebody, but you said that to think more like an entrepreneur. I always thought, I remember Brian Tracy, I went to one of his sales training workshops 30 years ago, and he says, you are not an employee. Right now, you need to start thinking of yourself as president of Me Inc. And I loved that. Yeah. And so I thought, and it goes right into some other stuff that we really like when we talk about Atlas Shrugged, and when Hank Rearden was on trial and he was asked, he says, I'm just trading my best efforts for the best efforts of others. And when we think about ourselves in that trader principle, that gives us control. Because I think that when we think of ourselves as an employee, we feel victimized out of the gate. And I think that that's part of the challenge.
No, absolutely, right on the mark. There's this view that comes from Karl Marx, unfortunately, and you find in so many today, including socialists who are running for office in this country or who are already elected. They just don't put the label on themselves, right? The idea of having, you have an employer class and a manager class and an investor class, and then the masses, the workers, right? Okay, every single worker is an investor in their own human capital, their own human skills. You're an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur of your own life. You have to figure out what to do with it. You've got to figure out what kind of career you want, what works for your interests, and something that works so that you can produce those values that you're going to trade with your fellows. Then that's part of what we have to do, is have a whole rethinking of what we are as individuals. This used to be, by the way, the American way. Think of our ancestors who came to this country with nothing. They had to figure out, how do I get water to drink? How do I get food? Here's a field full of rocks. What do I do? How do I clear those rocks out? How do I build a shelter? If I'm going to go find better land, how do I organize myself, my family, and my fellows to go 1,000 miles across country to Kansas or wherever it is where we have fertile fields, so I can build a farm? They had to be entrepreneurs. They were the entrepreneurial people. First of all, they left their countries because they wanted a better life. They weren't willing to sit on their butts and suffer and be poor and so forth. And they came over here, and that's the spirit of America. That is what built America, not people whining about, I deserve it, hand it over to me, redistribute the wealth, and I'm too stupid to understand basic economics, but that's why I should be running the economy. That was not the spirit of America.
No.
And we have to take those entrepreneurial values, and that is part of this whole integrated revolution we need in education and in our economy, where we free up the economy more, not just so we can get, better medications, which of course we want, but so we can make sure that the technological revolution goes forward, that we are producing robots that can take certain kind of jobs and open up the possibility of even better jobs for us. The artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, nanotechnology is a whole fascinating thing. About 3 years ago, there was a report of using nanotechnology material. This is little machines that are like literally at the atomic level or the molecular level, making these little machines and using nanofibers made this way, so that we can create an artificial kidney. And now I see that they're working on commercializing a version of an artificial kidney that's about this big, so dialysis may disappear in the next 3 to 4 years.
And wouldn't that be great?
Yes.
I mean, that would be so great for the human race to be able to move ourselves forward. So if folks want to get involved with what the Heartland Institute is to push all of this stuff forward, because this is vital, and people don't realize, if you're going to be living to 120, do you want to be doing half of it bedridden because technologies are being hamstrung, that they can't get to you because government overregulation is making it either cost prohibitive for the companies to produce the technology and to get it to market? I mean, these are the big questions.
Yeah. If you want to get more involved in Heartland, and first of all, you can go to www.heartland.org. You can see my work there. You can see the work on free to choose medicine there. You can see our work on energy there. You can see our work in healthcare reform there, education, and so many other things, taxes and budget. Another thing about Heartland is we work in all 50 states. Many of the great think tanks, are Washington-based, Cato, where I worked, Heritage, and the like. But we work with state legislators. So if you're listening to this and you're in Arizona, or you're in Iowa, or you're in, Illinois or Georgia or wherever it is, we probably worked with your state legislators on something. One of my colleagues did a speech on Medicaid reform in Pennsylvania a month or two ago. I worked on the paper or helped with the paper. I know he's working on one for Iowa right now. So there's stuff that we can do at the state level. So if you're interested in getting engaged with us, you can get our podcast, you can get our various publications. Obviously, donations are always welcome. And I like to say, no check is too large.
So, I like that.
Or you can get in contact with me personally. Email is ehudgins@heartland.org, or go on Facebook. I'm on Facebook. I look like this. This is my face. And
my modern-day Errol Flynn.
Thank you. You can always find me on Facebook as well. I'm always happy to help people out, activists, people who are just interested in information. Where do you get this? I did a paper, in fact, on free to choose medicine in Japan. Go to our website, put in a couple of search terms, and it'll come up, and you can read about what the Japanese are doing, because they're facing an aging crisis. They need better medicine. They can't have, the reforms are for regenerative medicine. They can't, they need to do it quicker, and so this is the approach they're taking.
Well, I'm always grateful for our time together, and I'm so admiring of all of the work that you've done everywhere, and mostly now at the Heartland Institute, where you've really spearheaded some exciting projects. So thanks for being a part of the show. And for those of you without a pencil, never fear, unlockyourwealthtoday.com is here, where you can visit our show page and get all the links to Ed's good stuff, his contact information, and so much more. For the maestro of Moolah, Michael Terry, and Ed Hudgins, I'm Heather Wagenhals. Now go out and unlock your wealth today.
UnlockYourWealthToday.com is produced by Heather Wagenhals and the Unlock Your Wealth Foundation. UnlockYourWealthToday.com and its affiliates are copyrighted 2018 with all rights reserved. For more information on the Keys to Riches Financial Wellness Series, please visit our website at www.unlockyourwealthtoday.com.